Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Barony Co-op Madness with me, Cornish-Knight, and my returning co-presenter, Thwax. Now, this is, as usual, a post-commentary review of our adventure. It turns out to be a relatively successful one this time, to be honest. We had no particular bug or lag issues on my end, and Thwax seemed to manage any such issues on his end relatively well. The game didn't crash, and we managed to actually get through to the final boss fight, which you will see sometime later this week, since we will be showing it all off. Now, we have, as always, pressed the random button, so you will be getting 2 random characters from us. We tend to enjoy doing that. It adds a bit of spice to the game, especially when you've played it as many times as Thwax and myself has. Adding a bit of randomness to Barony is always a good thing. Now, I am playing as a wizard, and Thwax is playing as a charming female rogue. Now, these two classes do not tend to work, I won't say they don't tend to work well together, because every class in Barony works well with other classes depending on how you play, but the rogue is predominantly I suppose you would sort of call them I wouldn't say a stealth character, but they are a light character in my opinion. They can't take much damage and they die very quickly in my experience. Now, fortunately, Thwax is relatively wise when it comes to Barony, so he has a lot more ability at playing classes where other people would find challenging. Now, I preferably like characters that can take a bit more of a pounding, partly because if I screw up I don't die in 2 seconds flat, so which is always a good thing. But I must admit, I do enjoy the mage class. I find them a lot more helpful for a team, I suppose you would call it. I always had an issue while playing this game with just me and Thwax, that I felt that I was a bit of a I won't say a drain on his resources, but a bit of an added weight, because obviously if you're playing as a fighty character in this game, you can't identify stuff. I mean, if you're playing as the knight, you can't even really identify cheese, so it can become very frustrating for the, I suppose you would just call it, for the identification member, like the rogue or the wizard or the paladin. Even though the paladin is particularly fantastic at it, he is better than the knight. It can become frustrating, I believe, for them to basically end up having to identify everything for their teammates, because it makes you feel like your whole purpose there is to just identify stuff. Now, as always, I am very deeply grateful for Thwax for being so helpful with me in this game. Teamwork is really important, and Thwax is a really good team player. Which is why I try and help him out as much as possible while playing. Fortunately, I was playing as a wizard, as I said, which allows you to identify a lot of your own items. Identification tends to be linked with intelligence, and because wizards have high intelligence, you tend to be a lot more effective in that matter, and I quickly leveled up my ability to identify items. Now, what's basically going to be happening in this Let's Play for this week is that I'll be releasing as many Barony episodes as I can. I believe I'm releasing 1 today, 1 tomorrow. You'll get your usual flurry of them on with Midweek Madness on Wednesday, though I will also be doing Pixel Piracy because I enjoy it and I know that you guys enjoy it too. Now, I shall be shipping out as many episodes as I can. I will be cutting some bits out of them because there are some sections of the game where not a lot of stuff goes on, so I know for a fact that you just don't want to watch us standing around for 5 minutes fiddling with our inventories, so that stuff will probably go, and we'll just try and keep racing along. Okay, this is the bit where I screw up, to be honest. In all honesty, I know what you guys are going to say. I should have pulled back, I should have used a ranged fire spell, I shouldn't have gone rushing in, and you're all correct, and you're all much wiser than I am. I tend to get very gun-ho, especially in games like this. I don't know what it is, I tend to sort of, if I haven't got like a magic wand or a magic staff in my hand, I tend to sort of forget that I'm a wizard half the time, and just literally sort of charge in cavalier style murdering stuff. Now normally when I die I would have cut that bit out, so we would have just moved straight back to the action with my perspective, but there was still a relatively large amount of stuff going on in this level that the Fuax had to deal with. We hadn't killed very much stuff, so there was still a lot of enemies, so I left it in partly because the Fuax is now at a relatively large disadvantage, which is that rogues are infamously squishy in Barony, so if you're playing as a rogue you really need to run away from everything. That's the tactic I have when I play. If I'm playing with another person, I'm playing as a squishy character, like a rogue, like an arcanist. If I get sort of jumped by more than one opponent, I will literally just leg it down the corridor looking for my teammate. I know it sounds cowardly, but I'd rather be alive and helpful to my team than being dead for the remainder of the level. This is something that I think not a lot of people realise, is that dying in Barony in co-op is actually surprisingly impactful. I know it's not like, say, in the Darkest Dungeon or anything like that, where once you die if you die in the Darkest Dungeon you stay dead, but you know what I mean. You can get knocked out of combat in the Darkest Dungeon, you get like broken leg, injuries, such and such. But in this, if you die, most people, I think, believe that there isn't like a massive penalty for dying. There actually is. It's in the game mechanics, though you have to take notice of it. Basically what happens is that if you die early on, not only will you be lower level than your companions, you will also have less skill efficiency, which is actually really bad. Because, okay, take for example with my character this game, what happens is, because I died so early in this game, I believe it was the first level, it meant that the Fuax harvested a lot of the additional XP in the floor, which meant that he was surprisingly much higher level than I was. This also means that his weapons, weapons abilities, and abilities in general, are also trained a lot higher than mine, which means that he can kill more enemies quicker than I can, and thus the cycle continues. And the problem with that is, you can quickly find yourself being left behind by your co-players or your party members, where you will not be able to cast higher level magical spells when you need to, or you won't have a big enough mana pool. I mean, an example in this game is that because I died a couple of times, my casting ability was not high enough to allow me to learn a couple of really important spells. I believe one of them was teleportation, which is always a useful spell to get out of trouble, and the other one was map reading. Now, I could learn map reading, but the problem I had was, because my mana pool was not large enough, I would cast map reading and it would suck up 2/3 of my mana pool, and I would be pretty much useless for the rest of the floor, magic wise. Because your magic does not really regenerate very quickly in this game, if you overestimate your spell use, or if you overuse your spell usage, you can end up becoming actually pretty weak at range. Take the fireball for example. If you use the fireball as a wizard at the beginning of the game, it takes about a quarter of your mana pool per shot. I think it's either a quarter or 1/6 of your mana pool per shot, which is actually a really large amount. Now, sorry, just taking a quick sip of my water. Now, a lot of people would say that's not actually a bad thing. You can still use melee, but you're still going to be relatively weak, so you want to use your mana sparingly until you have enough reserved. I believe there are items and potions and stuff which will bring your mana pool back up, but as ever in Barony, mana potions are expensive, and the requested items are a random percentage chance of turning up, so you can't really rely on them. Now, the Fuax is using the good old shooting through a metal grate trick that we discussed in our last video. This is a relatively useful thing to do. I'm not quite sure what distance you have to be away from the metal grate for it to work, or if you just need the enemy to be trying to get through the metal grate so its hitbox sticks out. I never quite figured it out. I would have to discuss with the Fuax at a later point. It would be cool if your arrows went through the gratings. I believe they can. As you can see, it's stuck in the wall there, but it can always be a bit of hit and miss. Now, this particular sort of like mini dungeon that you get in the first section of the game can be quite challenging depending on who you get in the rooms. I mean, normally on the first sort of quarter of the game it will be rat, spider, troll combination, or maybe they've switched the spiders out with a bunch more skeletons, it depends. On the deeper levels it tends to switch over to I think it tends to switch over to say like spider, goblin, or slime, goblin, troll, and then you get the horrible combination which I loathe, which is goblin, gnome, troll. I've had that one before. I hate the gnomes in this game. For anyone who doesn't know, the gnomes in Barony are the old-fashioned kind of gnomes, which is that they'll beat you to living daylights out of you with metal sticks, or just shoot you full of magic. They are not pleasant in the slightest. These aren't happy gnomes. These are your angry, murderous gnomes of mythology. For those of you who don't know, fairies and sort of all that kind of magical stuff like dwarves and fairies and sprites and pixies historically are actually been a relatively bad thing to come across. They were the Victorians, I suppose they cleaned up a lot of the old folk stories. You can look at take for example the Brothers Grimm. The Brothers Grimm stories, the original ones, are really dark, and what happens is that the Victorians, I suppose the Victorians don't like the graphic nature of them because they tend to be very PC to a greater or lesser extent, so they forced the Brothers Grimm to basically republish their work in a much more child-friendly context. You have to remember that folklore stories weren't originally designed for children. They were general folk stories designed for the public at large. So a good example of this is there's a cup called the Rillington Cup in Cornwall, which is basically a golden cup found. It's basically a golden cup found in a barrow, and the legend with it goes that there used to be a druid, a ghost of a druid, who'd sit on the barrow, and when passers-by went by, he would offer them a drink, and they would drink and drink and drink, and they could never empty the glass, well, the jug, or not the jug, it was like a goblet. And one day a drunk nobleman comes past on his horse, and he's trying to drink and drink and drink, and he can't empty it, and he gets annoyed, and so he throws the contents of the drink and the glass, well, he throws the content of the beaker onto the druid, and the next day they find him at the bottom of a cliff still holding the glass in terror, and he's dead. He's basically sort of died of fright, which is never a fantastic thing. But folklore stories are not meant to be nice, they're meant to be scary, and they're meant to basically be warnings. A lot of the time they were basically sort of cautionary tales for people, so it was sort of like, don't go out into the dark woods, or be suspicious of people who try and act friendly to you, all that kind of stuff. Folklore stories tend to be they don't tend to be sort of like stuff people like you're supposed to read for children. They're supposed to be sort of cautionary warnings. That's why they originally were called like cautionary tales. Like Aesop's fables and stuff like. Is it Aesop? I can never remember. But you have like a number of fables, like for example, the tortoise and the hare, and all that kind of stuff. They're all supposed to be like cautionary fables that you're supposed to tell people, and it's supposed to be sort of, you think the fable's over, and they give you advice cryptically, because you basically have to think it over and solve the answer for yourself. It's like, why did the chicken cross the road, kind of thing. Not the actual joke, but that would be sort of like the context. You'd go, why the chicken crossed the road, and you'd have to think about why the chicken was doing it, and you sort of thought out the answer to yourself. Now, to get back into the game, we've just found a bookshop. Bookshops are very useful, give you some very useful spells, and are relatively hard to come by because of obviously the randomization of the game. Now, we have found a good bunch of NPCs. I've always been rather mixed about NPCs, because they can be really useful, and at the other times they can be just downright frustrating. So it is a very sort of mixed bag. Now I was trying to get the 500 gold because they had the mapping spell, and the mapping spell is extremely useful, especially if you have minotaurs on, because you want to be able to find the exit and flee as fast as possible. Now if you don't have magical mapping and you have minotaurs on, my advice is to run like the Billio to try and find the exit, because you have about 5 minutes maximum normally. Minotaur can turn up at any time, and trust me, unless you're higher level and you can outrun him, he will hunt you down. And as we all know, he can smash through walls, he can smash through ceilings. I think the only NPC in the... there's two groups of NPCs in the game that really pose a threat to the Minotaur. One of them is the Zap Squad, which is a randomly generated NPC party full of NPCs with magical lightning staffs that basically patrol looking for the Minotaur, and they can turn up. The other one is the shopkeepers, because the shopkeepers are surprisingly one of the hardest mob units in the game. So my advice is never to annoy the shopkeepers. They tend to be nigh on unkillable and have massively overpowered abilities. I believe the developers did it to basically stop people from just like killing the shopkeepers and looting everything, because that can happen. You see a similar mechanic in Spelunky, where the shopkeepers are massively aggressive and massively overpowered. Now, as always, these episodes are going to be like 20 minutes long, as I have said, so just giving you a heads up that we are sort of drawing to the end of them, to the end of this episode, so I'm just giving you fair due and warning. Now, this is like the mining floor. As always, you get your standard mining floor: inhabitants, skeletons, rats, spiders, trolls on the later levels. It would be nice if there were a larger range of enemies. I wish that the developers would put some more enemy classes in, or at least put some more varieties, like full armoured skeleton knights, or like rats, like rat mothers that spawned more rats. I know for any of those who have played Nuclear Thrones that's a terrifying concept, but I do like it. Now, overall we're doing relatively well. We have no problems with lag during this game, which is why you're going to be getting all of the video rather than the sort of edited copy I tend to put up. We tend to put the edited copies up, well I do anyway, partly because, to be honest, I don't like people viewing laggy content, especially when everybody's moving around like they're underwater. It's not something I find enjoyable, and I don't find it that professional. So we're almost we're almost out of time for the day, folks. If you have liked, please press the like button. If you wish to subscribe, please press the subscription button. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter at the links provided below. I've been Cornish-Knight, and I will leave you to the rest of our adventure. I believe it is coming to a close. Catch you all next time. Bye.
is coming.